some expansion, extrapolation, exposition from the last time we were taping, very specifically, that I just mentioned, but very, very specifically, that nothing is completed until it is criticized. Now, you can look upon this literally, and I mean literally, and otherwise, as being an exposition from simply the need within the body of anything alive for there to be resistance, for anything to grow, for anything to continue living. There's got to be some kind of resistance. There's got to be, if nothing else, the hot breath of death right over the shoulder of that which seems to be alive. The warm breath, at least, of devolution right over the other shoulder of attempted evolution. But very specifically, I want you to try and see that that which the ordinary intelligence refers to as criticism is a slightly more refined idea and a reality of resistance. Because criticism is looked on generally, except then by critics and by speculative academians, criticism in general is looked at as being a negative occupation, a negative activity. And if you're the one being criticized, of course, it's looked at as being worse than that. But criticism is not an add-on. Criticism is an integral part of everything. Criticism is not superfluous, and it is not undesirable, because whatever it is, and you and your activities are not exempt from it. It may be of such a small matter to life, no offense to you, it's true with all of us. It may be such a small matter to life that you are not actually criticized in print in the New York Book Review or the front page of the Albuquerque Times, but there is criticism of everything if it is to be completed. Now, in life, as I point out from several ways, or attempted to, there are these occurrences continually. The example I have made up 4 or 5 or more times is like someone at a street corner, 2 strangers, and somebody says, "Do you know what time it is?" And the guy says, 4 o'clock, and you say, "Thanks." That, I'm not going to stand here and argue and try to prove I could pull out something from that kind of example, but for all intents and purposes, assume that that almost has no criticism. It could. I said I wasn't going to do it, but here we go. Well, I can't resist trying to tell you, I started to say all I know. I can't resist trying to tell you all that you might be able to hear and use. You could ask a guy, a stranger, "What time is it?" And he can go, you know, you stand there looking off, and you say, "Hey, buddy, you got the time?" And he can go, that's criticism. You understand? Like, you know, buy a watch, Charlie, or, you know, don't ask me. Or, you know, I'm just a run-of-the-mill sorehead, and I don't like people talking to me. But operationally speaking, it's almost of no consequence whether you can spot any criticism on those kind of passing energy bursts. Now, in your life, there may be those things that apparently take longer than the few seconds that little interchange took. And you may not, if you tried to look right quickly, you might not immediately realize that you have received criticism. And you might say, well, this has been something I've been interested in for a long time. But then if you're really good, you could look and see and ask yourself this: is it a continuing interest that I have, or is it daily? Which is, in the old world, that's everyone's sense of time, is a daily reoccurrence. I think about it and I forget it, and I think about it and forget it. If you do that, then you're confronted with what amounts to that same kind of scenario that I've just made up. Is like you saying, boy, I ought to just chunk all this and go into music full time. Do-do-do-do-do-do. And you think about it an hour later, the next day. Let's say you think about it once a day. But you might as well be dying and being reborn. Because to you, time is passing on a daily basis, and it's no more. It took no more time for you to just driving past another car on the freeway and you hear this song that you like, this new song coming out of his car, and you think, Jesus, I shouldn't even go to work. I would just go into music full time. Da-da-da-da-da. And that's it. And within you, it took more time than, hey, do you know what time it is? It's 4:30, thanks. So on that basis, you might not see that there has been any criticism. Does not mean that there is not a form of criticism going on. Why don't you do it, in other words? But back to the opening comment, I want you to see that nothing that is alive, nothing that has a continuing, usable, observable life inside the body of life presently, nothing is complete until it is criticized. Life itself takes little note, to safely put it, of what it's doing in its own puppet show until it's got both hands going. Life can have one hand going, I think I'll become a famous musician and I'll give up this old job of being an accountant. And it's as though life does not even take any notice of this. Or it's saying, I am going to take over Italy again. I'll be somebody. I'll be the 20th century's first Mediterranean tyrant. Somewhere somebody's saying that. It's not much more up to this point than this one hand saying, hey, do you know what time it is? Until life has got the other hand going, and that you have fully some form of Punch and Judy of, hey Judy, you won't do it? And she hits him. Or she says, do it. I wouldn't do it with you if you were the last hand puppet on earth. It has to be up to that point before even life takes much note of what's going on. I am not going much further with this specific part, but you should take note. I am giving you an unrecognized law that nothing is complete until it is criticized. But notice that life is also wired up that one of its hands inside of a critical situation continually plays out a part of denouncing criticism. And even you, who wants to be criticized in the old world sense of it? Who wants to do something? Who wants to just be alive and have somebody going, oh, it's you again? Are you still trying to tap dance? Are you still making that funny music? Why don't you get a job? Why don't you cut your hair? Why don't you straighten up? And you think, well, nobody needs that. And even in the Western world, it is looked at as being probably the basis, one of the big bases of most traumas, most neuroses. But you shouldn't do that to children. You shouldn't do it with adults. You shouldn't do it with your loved ones. Nothing is complete without criticism until life has one hand criticizing over here what it's doing, some new scene that it came up with, of like, I have a new idea over here in any field, science, social sciences, religion, everyday affairs, economics, until one hand goes, hey, I think so-and-so is true. I believe this is a new workable idea. It's as though life has given a whole new meaning to the PP, even the EPP, the elongated pregnant pause. Because if it doesn't stick its other hand up and play Judy to Punch over here, this thing is not going to live. This puppet, this idea. It may make some motions. It may even apparently trying to get something started. Hey, let's do so-and-so. And you're going to have to try and begin to see what so-called time is. This thing, it could last a second. It might last hours. It might last days. It might last months. In a sense of the words it said of, hey, why don't we do so-and-so? And it may kind of reverberate, bounce around, ricochet off certain walls in a 3D universe. It may not just disappear immediately, but it's not going to live because it will not get completed unless life, for whatever reason, sticks up the other hand and goes, what a crummy idea. There are words to that effect. Consider all the ways that criticism is denounced, that it is looked at certain times by almost anyone in the middle of the bell curve as being that which should be avoided, that it's undesirable, that you don't want to be criticized for what you do. It's not the way to help people, and so on and so on and so on. But as you're doing that, is remember what I told you, it is an absolute unrecognized law. It is more complex. It will not fly, and it's not necessarily certain in the three-dimensional old world. But nothing is completed, nothing, until it is criticized. None of the gods, to go back to what your forefathers used to consider to be important matters. The gods are not complete until he's got an enemy, until he's got a critic. That one of the lesser gods, one of his angels, one of his minions tries to help or do something. You know, by helping, like saying, you know, you're awfully pushy for a God. I know you're God, but you're a little too pushy. It's only then that you hear about the gods. Or Adam and Eve, their creation criticizes them. Like, why'd you arrange things this way? Nothing is completed until it is criticized. Now, if we might take a short flight over into another unseen corner of the universe. Life offers up, through its many hand puppets, it offers up criticism for all of man's viable activities. Obviously the arts, that's the first one you think about with criticism, at least with a capital C. Oh, literature, music, painting. But the sciences, you've got criticism. The social sciences, the hard sciences, social mores, civilization itself, even religion is going to be criticized if it's going to be completed. That would seem, I could go in further detail, but wouldn't that seem to about cover it? Because I started out saying that nothing is completed until it's criticized. And so now I just picked out the human activities, all of the arts, any human occupation, but I didn't make that specifically clear. An architect's going to be criticized if he's going to be completed, if he's going to become a fairly serious cog in the architectural part of the machinery of life. Even a bricklayer. Everybody, what are you doing? Did I about cover it? Of course, that's a trick question, and you knew that. But I forgot the trick. So on to the next subject. There is an area that life offers no criticism of. A human activity that there is no large C and there's really no small c. Criticism thereof. Are we going to play Wheel of Misfortune and everybody try and guess what is it? All forms of music, serious music, as it's called in the West, classical music, country music, heavy metal music. There are little magazines now, there are columns written periodically in newspapers offering up, apparently, intellectual criticism of heavy metal music or of country music. There's criticism of all forms of the arts, performing, plastic, literature, all occupations. Again, I repeat, it may seem obvious that in architecture, for instance, but there is criticism of a guy laying bricks. If he's going to be a complete bricklayer, there's going to be criticism of his work. You guys should understand that. A nail driver, well, a carpenter. A cab driver. But I still say that there's one activity that life does not offer up, what we're talking about now, criticism of. All right, before I tell you what, how about this? Criticism. One hand puppet in any of life's scenarios, and there's little plays going on. Criticism and critics are used for specific reasons. Well, specifically, it helps create a more complex mixture from a more simplistic one, as I pointed out. Just criticism itself makes something more complex. But specifically, in a certain other direction, or in a more specific direction, let me point out that critics do this. Not individually. We're talking about the organic activity of that energy transformation in life called criticism. Let's stick with the capital C right now. Real professional criticism, whether paid or unpaid. Critics are doing this to an activity, let's say the arts, a piece of music or a painting, a book. Critics serve this purpose. Let me put it to you several ways. They place new emphasis, or they place unexpected emphasis, or they place emphasis where perhaps the public, perhaps the author, the painter, the composer did not even intend any. Or he did not think about it that way. The criticism helps place emphasis in certain places. Criticism helps, apparently, establish meaning. Such as a critic says, well, we have seen Miss So-and-so's work now for the last several years, and I was one of the ones who said I thought she had some promise. But what we're finding now is a kind of postmodernism juxtaposition of the kinds of free-floating forms that do seem to have some a priori reference to reality objectively, if we may use such a crude term in here the late 1980s, to that which is obviously the upcoming intellectual flights of imagination, if not new movements into the 90s and beyond. Therefore we find, or I find her to be on the verge, if not through the door, on the threshold of making important statements for even a post-modernistic school of painting. All right, that seemed to those that are affected by it, and those who might sit out and laugh, you're still going to get affected by it some way. It would seem to be establishing some meaning. Now, I've done this a little bit before, and I've even said then the artist might be staying around, the painter, and she might go, yeah, that's what I meant, yeah. And she wants to be sure and get a copy of that so that next time she's interviewed, she can say, if they say, well, how would you explain, what would you say is the basis, or at least the thrust currently of your painting? And she'd go, well, it's not unlike, you know, so-and-so that writes for Harper's that, they say, oh yeah. So it's not completely unlike he was commenting on my work only several weeks ago. And that show I was when we opened up in Los Angeles. I don't know, it's been my contention that there is going to be a period of not just postmodernism, but of post-postmodernism, wherein we're going to have to bridge, or it seems to me that I am maybe just one of many spokespeople that may come up in the arts, but that I'm trying to bridge the kind of postmodernistic juxtaposition of certain forms that still spatially seem to refer back to some kind of objective reality, I guess as people would want to have called it, and then into, so now the artist has taken that be part of the meaning. It's not simply funny, it's not sarcastic, it is a completing of the painting itself. It is helping complete it. Now back to where we were. And that's just a prime example. You can do your own, surely, if I take off a second, you can do your own in your head the same way with music, literature. A critic can take a book. The book can be a complex piece of Romana clay on some famous figure. It could be fiction, but they can add, as witnessed by good reviews. I say good by their amount of space they give to it. I assume they take them as being good and worthwhile. In places like the New York Review of Books, some of the reviews are almost as long as a small novel itself. But then it adds to, the critic adds to what apparently was the intent of the work, if there was one. If the author said, well, what I intended to do was blah, 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 blah. The critic says, well, that's good, but I also see, on a subconscious level, I also see a parallel message. It makes it more complex. It's not just criticism. It's not just saying, well, you can't paint, or the book is terrible. That's not just criticism. Criticism helps complete something. I still suggest to you that there is a very common human activity that is a form of art that life does not currently offer up that kind of criticism. To help place emphasis, to try and analyze, to try and add some complexity to what the author of this particular activity, the source of this activity I have in mind, did. Oh, all right, I'll tell you what it is. Talk! Life has everyone talking. And in the sense that is true of all other human activities, life does not have another hand offering up criticism of the talk itself. Now don't get misled and think of a politician or think of some author that is on a show and he starts describing his book, and then later some critic says, not only did I read his book, I heard his attempted explanation and it was pretty shaky. No, you're missing it. The activity of talk itself, life does not offer up criticism with a big C for other humans to in some way take what another person has said and to try to put the emphasis in a new place, to try and give it more meaning, to try and make it more complex than it was, to try and add to what was said. I told you, or I didn't say sticky, but I told you it's going to be a subtle side flight. This does not occur. It's almost as though life is taken, up until now, the art of talk, the science of talk, the soft science of talk, the activity of human talk. And it's almost as though it has left it in some sort of untouchable position. Why? What gives, to be technical? Why does not, after it's got this hand up everybody's knickers, because it's making everybody talk, it's done that, so there's all of humanity, there's mankind, and it keeps doing it. And by now you all realize how absolutely, unconditionally necessary talk is. And so life has done this, and it's as though it adamantly refuses to run up its other hand and offer any criticism, with a big C now, not just resistance to, not just negative criticism, but of having other humans try and elaborate, place new emphasis, different emphasis, offer new interpretations of talk itself. It's as though talk goes on with no criticism. It's as though talk goes on almost as though people don't really pay much attention to it. No, that can't, no. No, as oftentimes the case, I probably went too far. It's as though life has let talk become like its own art. And now in art, try and think parallelly. When I'm saying talk, think about some unknown form of painting or music. It lets this go on. And other humans, it has yet to have other humans come along and try and to elaborate, to make what's one person, I don't care what person, we're not talking about necessarily a public figure, just everybody, just the lowliest little ditch digger somewhere, his friends, people he knows. No one seems to be driven by life to offer the kind of criticism we're talking about with a big C, to make what this guy says more meaningful, to offer some interpretations. For this bricklayer to be sitting around at his weekly poker game or at the bar, and he makes some comment about, the TV's playing, he says, all politicians are full of it. And down the bar, one of his friends or a stranger, but somebody there in the bar does not turn to someone else and says, did you hear Alonzo saying, politicians are full of it? I'm not unaware of why a man would say that about politicians. But I think what we're witnessing by hearing that is a kind of non-participatory weight upon common people like us and Alonzo, and striking out against those kinds of forces into which we cannot have any pertinent input. You ever heard that? Not just in a working man's bar. Do you ever hear that around your house? Did your father ever say anything and then leave the room and your mother says, that's an interesting concept your father just said? And it leads me, and then go into a further elaboration on it. Not just the words. I don't want to get you too tied up, because it's still not just the words. It's not just what Alonzo said. Because, of course, he can say something like all politicians are full of it in a bar, and somebody else can say, hey, don't talk that way, my brother's mayor. Something like that. But the talk itself as being an art is not subject to, it is not open to. It's as though life either has not thought about it, or for some reason has yet to run up its hand and offer up a form of big C criticism of talk as being a necessary, completed, viable human activity. It's as though it just runs and there's nobody to say anything about it. Not just to say, well, hey, these words have on no clothes. It's just that nobody has anything to say. I mean, they can say, never mind, or you're wrong. But as far as one human adding elaboration, adding complexity, think about it. Not just the subject matter, but the art itself, the activity itself. It's as though everybody paints a little picture all the time, as though everybody does a little quick symphony, and other people may apparently react to it. But insofar as other people are apparently now joining in to help complete it, not in any sense that you could objectively decide, well, that's what I meant, or it's better now, just in the sense of someone else now offering new interpretations, trying to reshift the emphasis, or trying to say to somebody, or even themselves, that, well, what the person actually meant was so-and-so. You can't find it. Unless that flight's too sticky and you keep thinking that you can on the basis of the context of the words of somebody arguing with somebody else. It's not the context. It is that there is no apparent need yet for that kind of criticism, that kind of one humans, elaborating on, adding to, big C, being a critic vis-a-vis human talk. We have critics of sports. We got critics of everything except talk. Nobody comments on the human activity of talk. One more time. Now, they will comment on the content. The guy's crazy. That's nonsense what he just said. That is not criticism of the activity, of the art. What would happen if there was a small exception? What if life is easing into it vis-a-vis the dialogue that people have themselves? Let's see if I can change the subject and you not notice. In a state, in a land, but in a state where everything's metaphorical, nothing is. Now, of all the info that I feed into this thing that, in your case, we're referring to as this thing, it's got to be extracted. Something's got to be taken back out, and it's got to be useful. This is not really this unless it's real life. In real life, that is a state where everything's metaphorical, then nothing is. Variation. Kirkle listing number 1. The first act is always metaphorical. The second one's not. Anyone who attempts to do anything that they believe, and I got no comment to make, if they believe it, if they think that they're involved with some activity to improve themselves in any way, they're going to go into some form of repetitions, trying to build up the body, trying to build up artistic ability, trying to build up their mind. And very shortly, it will take on, even if they do not use this word, it will take on a metaphorical significance. Now, the more they believed specifically, that is, well, by belief, less than absolute certainty in what they think. But as long as they think, to some degree, or they accept someone else's thinking, that what I'm doing could lead to some expansion of my intellectual or artistic or spiritual or whatever term they got, powers, then the first act of what they're doing, and it can begin to affect their whole life, if what they're doing in their religion or some cult, or trying to they're practicing their music, they're composing as many hours a day as they're sleeping, it will become metaphorical. As a rule, no one ever gets out of that stage. Now, at the 3D level, that is seen as being progress. All the world's intellectual, they used to be called spiritual, so I won't argue with it right now, make it easier for some of you to see. Spiritual, not just smart guys, but these great guys, these demigods. If there's one thing in common throughout all of time and all locales used to describe their speech, is what? Certainly metaphorical. All of them. The gods. Whenever God talks to somebody in any land, any time, it's never right to the point, is it? Well, in the West, we got some pretty bad gods, and some of them, when they get mad, they talk pretty straightforward. Like, watch it. You know, I'm going to kill everybody, you better get out of town, that kind of stuff. Good Pentagon warrior gods of the Old and New Testament. But the messages, if someone is becoming extraordinary at all, if they're just on the road, if they're struggling, then life to them becomes metaphorical. And from outside views, those who are wired up by life to be interested in such things, to take some note of it, they take note that these people are beginning to talk, perhaps even think, metaphorically. God, I wish I'd taken the time when I was younger to smoke more dope or to get on that right path, because I can say something to old so-and-so, and he'll look off, and goddamn, he'll turn into a metaphor in a minute. That, of course, you know, or you should know, is not a joke. In the great marketplace in the city of that kind of activity, that should be your quick ticket to some sort of fame. Not that that's the point, but that is how people are recognized. That's how they're pointed out, that the person has such wisdom that they speak, they apparently think metaphorically. That is the first act. Because in the first act, everything, if you ever get into that play, if you ever get into that kind of attempted theatrical journey, the first act becomes all metaphorical. The second act is not. The second act is what gives the reality to what I said, that this is not really this, unless it's real life. If it is metaphorical, if it is just info that apparently I or someone else has put into it, and it's just there, and you nibble on it, or you think about it, you pull it out, and you twist it around, or you write about it, you turn it upside down, you think about it, and then you forget about it, and you think about it. That's the first act. And it's not really this. It's a metaphor for this. Because if this is not real life, you're in the first act. That me saying, well, let's start off and I'll apparently talk about economics, except I'm not actually talking about economics, except on the nights I say, all right, I'm really going to talk about economics, when you know I'm just being funny. But if you take it all as being metaphorical, that, well, that is good. You're real good at it. You can just pick out politics, you can pick out some law that I've forgotten about from high school, from physics, and you can show metaphorically how that could be related, or perhaps how it just obviously is related, if you want to take it metaphorically, to the psychology of man. If that was the end of it, why would I deny, or why would I keep insisting, look, it's metaphorical to start with, and I will start there tonight, but it's not metaphorical. It is. If you're going to stay in the first act, it is metaphorical. But that's all it ever is to you. You have not taken anything out of it. And you'll never get to the second act. It will not be part of real life. It will be less useful than it can be. In the way in which life has arranged man, in the way in which life has apparently arranged things for man, let me ask you a question. Would it seem to you that man is arranged, and those things apparently about man is total milieu, are they so arranged that his dissatisfied intellectual sense of himself as an individual, would it seem to be driven by the desire to achieve the better or to suppress the worse? Which would it seem to be? Which would it seem to be in you? Would there seem to be a general response to that, having to do with human nature in general? Do people seem to be driven in this dissatisfaction of being alive, being an achiever, being someone trying to do something in life? Would it seem to be that people are driven, that what they're trying to do is to achieve something better, to achieve the better, or would it seem that what they're up to is trying to suppress the worse? Well, before I give you an answer at all, if I do, let me point out one thing. In the old world, all sense of change, to old intelligence, to ordinary intelligence, all sense of change is based on the latter. That kind of, from one view, worn out, being worn out concept, idea is all that's really still available in the old world. When people think about change, what is it? Generally speaking, when they think, well, I need to change, you say, well, how? Is their attitude, not just the specific word necessarily in the beginning, but is the attitude, I'm going to achieve the better in some way, or am I going to be trying to suppress the less desirable, the worse in me? Now, if you get real slick, even with old intelligence, you might think, well, there's large areas where people do try and do something better. They're not simply trying to stop old bad habits of some kind, but they're actually trying to aspire to something better. Really? What is all desire for change at the ordinary level? Even if, via the word, you might at first say, well, I think that I am trying to achieve the better. But I think so-and-so is, because I asked them what they're doing lately, and they said, I am taking up a new course in how to improve your memory. That is, I'm trying to do better. I'm trying to achieve something better. Is that correct? Or someone says, I'm taking this non-credit course over there at the university on how New Age parenting, so that I can be a better parent. I'm trying to achieve the better. Really? Is that what it is? If you get really good, you can see, I'll give you a little breathing room, you can see that most attempts, even institutional attempts to improve yourself, is just a renamed form of an AA meeting. Why does anyone want to achieve the better? Why does anyone want to improve themselves? Can you imagine a real perfect person like, Eva Roy Slade or Arnold Ziffel? Or if you were perfect, why would you want to take a self-improvement course? Can you picture Buddha over there at the 9-credit courses, him checking to see what they're offering at night? This is much more subtle than words. It has to do with the way a person feels in their own nervous system. And we're getting close to where the limbic, as I'm calling it right now, the kind of talking that begins to arise out of the physical sensation of being alive. And then as you begin to talk, there is the further physical sensation that you are in some way 1 step, 1 inch removed, at least the thickness of your epidermis, from the rest of life, that there is me, and then there's not me. When you get there, all feelings generally of improvement, that I want to do better, is on the basis that I am sorely lacking in some way. And I feel it. Nobody has to tell me. Maybe I don't even know what it is. I may have to go take a course, if there is one, about how to sort out your negative feelings toward yourself and find out which area it is that you should work on. That's the full title of the course. I don't know how to make it. I guess I can make it short. I'd never thought about it before, but that's the title of the course, that you got to go take that kind of at least short-term course to even figure out what it is you should work on. Or else you might think, Jesus, I've got so many bad sides. It's a toss-up. Where should I start? We got to turn the tape over. At the 3-dimensional level of intelligence, this is really neither here nor there as always. If you're going to stay in the old world, it doesn't matter. But there is a very practical piece of around-the-corner reality to this, of all notions that people have of change, the feeling inside your own nervous system of being dissatisfied, and then you have to talk about it or it doesn't exist, or you're always kind of irritated. And so you got to come up with something such as, well, it's probably because I need more education. You have to say something for it to even be real enough that apparently that you can try and deal with it in some way. The significance, as I am hinting to you, what if you found out that that was as common and as necessary as breath, that it was not individual and personal, and that the kind of dual choice that you have of trying to either do better, or perhaps I should start off and try and clean up, suppress some of the worst in me, if there was no such division, and that any idea of doing better is forever predicated upon I am doing worse, and it's an envelope attempting to engage itself, to engulf itself, and it cannot be done at the 3D level. It is a... Can you imagine in the 3D world a dog with a tail that goes into the 4th dimension and it chasing it forever? Well, I was sort of tired in the 3D world. See, they've already made up that one before me as futile as a dog chasing its tail. It's not completely futile because a dog oftentimes catches his tail. But then you can say, well, it's futile. What good does it do him? Let's do it better. His tail goes in around the corner to the 4th dimension. So now take that. In other words, you can't ever catch it. What then would it matter whether someone was looking at their attempts to change as they attempt to achieve the better or to suppress the worst in them? The worst, not worst necessarily, but worse. After all these weeks, I am going to get the times we read all those car routes I wrote a handful and we're going to hit them. Are you ready? One I didn't bring that somebody wrote. It was a good one. Is I can't remember the chi root now. I need to take a memory course. Says you. It had to do with somewhere in the chi root about energy conversion, and the person asked if this was just a question whether there was any application to energy conversion and human emotions. Consider, let's take an example, two lovers, a human emotion. Let's start off, in fact the person, I remember the question, they threw in some examples and they threw in happiness. So let's start with happiness. Two lovers and one of them is experiencing happiness. Can you follow this conversion with me just sketching it roughly? Happiness to suspicion to anger to realization to guilt to self-condemnation to forgiveness and then back to happiness. Could you see, in fact, and emotion is just one, but could you see that this kind of transmission, this kind of movement of energy, in this case emotions, is like waves going through water? The oceans do not have to move. That's not what waves are. I assume all of you know that. A wave breaking up on the shore is not some water that was over, if we're staying in Florida, for instance, it's not some water that left Africa day before yesterday. The water's just there, just bobbing up and down. The waves just go through it. It gives a sensation of motion. What's the difference between being happy and being suspicious? So there's a lot of difference. Well, here's two people happy. Here it is, it's you, and you're just happy, you're in love. You just got home and you're thinking, when will my love be here? And you're happy, and you look at his or her picture, and then at the same time you have to notice the clock, and she's an hour late. And you go, this is not the first time this has happened. Then, a little while later, it's gone from just suspicion, like, it's gone to, goddamn, where the hell is she? You're still being emotional. Now, back in the 3D world, back in the old country, back in the city, they call these different emotions. Which in the city, remember, they got everything cut up episodically. They believe that everything is different, except those things are the same, and see, they got all confused right there immediately. There is a conversion of all energies. Nobody ever thought about it, I guess, or you're reacting, that happiness is something you are, and then something happens, whether it's toward or untoward. Well, she's late, and then happiness is like you laid it aside a minute, and now you're suspicious. That's kind of wasteful, isn't it? It can just be converted. That happiness. And this all could happen. I said an hour or so. We could even make it shorter, that you come in, and you're happy. Oh, my darling, I'm home. And suddenly you realize, let's forget an hour, and you're late. And you look, and she's not here. And all of this can go through in a matter. Happiness, suspicion, you look around, God damn, where the hell is she? Anger, then you hear the car pull up. Guilt, realization, oh Jesus. And then forgiveness, either by yourself or you have to say, oh hi. And at least she's smiling. It's like, well, boy, she doesn't know what I've been thinking for the last 30 seconds. And it's back to, oh God, oh happiness. Is it necessary that all of those, whatever it was, I named 7 or 8 different emotions, that one replace the other? Does one wave come up on the shore and it has to stop and then run out of the way for the next one? Perhaps some night, and perhaps not, I'll do more on that, because that was a good question, the way it was put, or the way it got me talking now. Because there is, as always, or I wouldn't bring it up, it's not just theoretically or verbally interesting, if you found it to be so. It is that people believe that they are experiencing different emotions all the time, that it's a different thing going on. And that has an impact. It's supposed to. Well, I need to replace my guilt. I need to replace my anger with happiness. Maybe I'll take a course. Maybe I'll go talk to a rabbi or a bartender. But I need to get rid of this one and get another one. Think about the waves, and you're just there bobbing for 60 or 70 years. And there is a sensation of movement, but it's a continual, I'm suggesting to you the possibility, even with human emotion, it's a continual energy conversion, which is like a wave action just flowing through your nervous system. The motor end of the loop, the limbic, the cortical, and it's a continuing conversion. But people see it, and it has, and I repeat, it has a very practical impact that people think of it and accept it as being a change. People talk about, I want to get rid of this emotion. I want to suppress this kind of emotion. I want to free myself from feeling this emotion. Is that what they're actually talking about? Is that the way it works? Is emotion something you picked up? Is that any more real a emotion of any kind or an emotion than the thing psychology or religion? Is energy. Does energy exist in some pristine, naked, isolated way, which is what happiness would be or anger would be? Or is it a continual wave action and it gives the impression of an episodic life? Well, I was angry at her, but she got home and told me her car wouldn't start. And I thought, I should have thought of that. So I'm not angry anymore. It's like anger, I took it and went, well, go away from here, you naughty emotion. I won't be angry. Where'd it go? Where'd it come from? Tell you the last time that has some significance. Useful significance. Several asked this one. The chi root was, and I'm not trusting all these people, some of the chi roots, I'm going to take it the way they ask it, or I'll tell you. Well, they quoted it correctly. Sometimes they may have, maybe they didn't. But here's the way, the one they remembered, with whom might the real revolutionist be in collusion? With whom might a real revolution be in collusion? That was the chi root. That was more or less a real quote. My first immediate response to the question is this one. Who else? But if that's too definitive, that is elusive, I could be a little more verbally specific and put it to you this way. At this particular moment, to try and expand on it at all, only one name comes to mind. It starts with an L, and it's not Luther. It's not Lothar, not Lindberger, Luxembourg. They asked for further elaboration on this one, the chi root, and it went something like this. When you leave your old chemical neighborhood, who gets this? When you move from your old chemical neighborhood, I think it went, who gets the security deposit? Well, let me ask rhetorically, four-dimensionally rhetorically, or else it's of no value at all. Why would someone, in the process of moving into some faraway mansion, even have much concern over what's happened, the possibilities, the linger-on parts of your erstwhile abode, that old cheap apartment? Who would have time? What kind of intelligent person that even has gotten to the point to be able to move out of apartment homes and has got over in a faraway place, a long way off, this kind of, I'm just going to call it a mansion, just trust me. And to be all that concerned about, oh gee, I should have got back, I was due that security deposit. What kind of information, what kind of energy left back at the old apartment that if you're over there, and there it is, a singular, I'll call it a mansion again. I hate to make it sound like it's this kind of intellectual crudeness, but are you sure you'd even think about it? Now, if you're my kind of person, eventually you would, because eventually you've got to think about everything that you could have done, which is another story, but you've got to one time finally think of it. But then, would you go to the effort to get on a boat, in a plane, on your feet, and go back and go through the process of, I want my $200 back, or whatever it was, my 200 ideas, my 200 sufferings, my 200 arguments, I want them back? I don't know. All right. Requests for more. This person had a string of them. Some of these I like because one or two people I think made up their own and tried to trick me and stick them in here. Because some of these I don't recognize. But here it goes. Here's their attempted quote for one. If you're going to hang around power, you've got to learn to speak the language. Just realize this simply. That kings, real monarchs, real sovereigns, do not speak the same language as the hoi polloi, as the people. They do not, or they would not be sovereigns. They do not speak the same language. Oh, they may speak something, run off on the tree of languages from the Romance and say, well, all right, the people and the king both speak French. But they're not speaking the same language. If they were, and he in some way or she in some way is sovereign, it's going to be short-lived. It will not be completed. The criticism will be too great. Looked at another way, the person leading a dance, the person leading sees different sights over their shoulder, over their partner's shoulder, than the person dancing backwards. Another one the person tried to do. 300 years ago, the church missed a golden opportunity to actually describe, quote, God, when they overlooked the laws of motion. All right, that one, of course, the only reason I even repeat this, that one is just self-evident. All right, the other one was one more from this person. Big sentences require big periods. All right. Lots of effort followed by a gigantic rest. Could we hear more regarding improvisation? The recent excursion to improvised daily was most spine-tingling. All right. Could we hear more on improvisation? Do you realize that 3 times a week you not only hear, nay, witness and experience yourselves? That is, if you're here and here. From an ordinary view, it strikes me, this was not really a Kairos, but this was a good question, good something somebody pointed out. It strikes me that in the ordinary sense, things never seem to arrive in, quote, their final form, if there is such a thing. Everything seems to arrive in need of improvement. And I know all this, blah, blah, blah. Would I care to say anything about it? All right, in the 3D world, they picked out a nice little, why I said quote, because that was their term here, that nothing seems to arrive in final form. If in the ordinary sense, in the 3D world, if something arrived in final form, you know what you would have. You would not have the thing, you would have its death mask. You would have a post-mortem report on it. Or, if you want it more physically, more materially, you might have the corpus. But you would not have the thing, if it indeed was in final form. And all you're looking at is the SOP of life through man. It's just the standard operating procedure of how life expands through man. It is part of the daily toil in which everyone is obligated, that everyone is drafted into, is to apparently put it closer into final form. And one of the ultimate methods may be blabber. I might also refer you back to the opening tonight when I point out that nothing is completed until it's criticized. Nothing is in its final form when it arrives, because at least it's got to arrive, and if it's going to happen quickly, there's going to be some little time lag until it arrives and people look at it. If from one view it is in final form, it's going to arrive, and somebody, if it's going to live and contribute to life's growth there for some period, in some era, then it arrives. And finally, life's going to stick up a hand over here somewhere and say, is that the final form of this? And it's going to say, yeah. And it's going to say, well, all right, well, rather than just me naysaying or just laughing in a reaction, may I comment on it? And there you go. Now the thing is closer to completion. It is closer to being not a final form, because there is only one final form in the 3D world. Could you say more about ideas? Well, this is another question. Not all these were chi roots, as you will see, but can I say more about ideas splitting into complex and simple parts, i.e., examples? All right, for an example. Again, one that should be easy. I could use politics, but how about religion or politics simultaneously? Coevally. All religions, if they're going to survive, and they become part of the old world scheme of things in some time and some place, they very shortly not only get criticized, they will turn into what? They will divide. I've already pointed that out, was the basis of the first question, that anything that's going to live is going to split, it's going to divide. So it divides up into what is commonly referred to as the progressive or the liberal, and then the orthodoxy. And I say the progressive first because the orthodoxy only gets named. It's a form of criticism, a form of elaboration, as soon as some kind of wild Turks, young Turks, wild hares, this thing goes on daily. It may go on daily for 100 years. But something is going to happen. There's going to be the progressive wing of the Whigs, the Republicans, the Catholics, the Jews. There's going to be this split. And they will call themselves, in some form, has always been, they'll call themselves in some way progressive. What they're saying is that we are more constructive. We are more liberal, is a term used sometimes, but it's really what they're saying is we are more progressive. This was a good idea, and I'm glad I am Jewish. I'm glad I am a Catholic. I'm glad I am a Republican. But things have bogged down, if not becoming, or in danger of becoming, moribund. And what we need is some young, fresh blood. And so it's a form of criticism, not just necessarily negative. They may say, I love the party, I love my religion. But we need to refashion the emphasis. It's a different time. These are more complex days than when our forefathers pursued these political ideas or these religious ideas. What they're saying when they say progressive is that camp is saying that what we want to do is be more inclusive, that we want to be able to take in new, even diverse ideas. While the orthodoxy, whether it be religious or political, but the orthodoxy, by its very nature, is being exclusive. And what it attempts to do, through various forms, but verbally, of course, is the main one, is attempts to keep itself limited to just one, or just a couple, just a few basic ideas. Energy packets and words. That has always been true. You have got a split there. I can do it in various ways, and I can refine it, and I can make it more complex and more simplistic. But you can look in human activities, the secondary activities of man. You can see the split. Anytime something's going to live, it can be a field of painting, postmodernism. And if it's going to last, it may not last long enough to actually split. It may just come and go. But if it does, it will turn into a kind of orthodoxy. I don't recall them ever using these terms in the art world, but they have their own variation. It will turn into a form of orthodoxy and then progressives, that if they don't actually try and change the name, if life is still playing this game up here with, let's call it postmodernism painting, then there'll be some people who come along after a few days, maybe years full of daily time movements, but there'll be some group that say, we're not here to actually try and turn over the so-called postmodernism era of painting, because that's how I grew up. That was my first influences were that school, and I still have great favor in it. But we cannot stand still. We're going to have to push the limits, and either a painter or some critic will come along and they'll rename it, maybe no more than the New York postmodernist as opposed to the West Coast postmodernist. But one will be seen. One will be the emphasis verbally, the criticism, will call it progressive. And it will label the other orthodox. If it doesn't use the word, you surely can spot it. That it's saying that one of them is now saying we want to be more inclusive. We want to change. We want to take in more diverse ideas, and when it's really percolating, even conflicting ideas. That, hey, some form of religion will offshoot, and if it's really progressive, I'm talking about big time progressive, and it has people saying, well, you're too progressive. We should be orthodox. If they're real progressive, they'll say, hey, well, come on over and join us part-time because, well, we got room for you if you don't like it. Which, of course, was the basis of establishing Ralph Waldo Emerson. Well, I think his parents helped too with that in the Unitarian Church. But the orthodoxy is exclusive, and it, at least verbally, is in charge of a continuing, a strong-willed, even a vehement defense of one or just a small number of concepts. That these were the concepts, these were the ideas, that is the words, these were the things identified by our founder, our prophet, my fathers, the past generations, our culture. This is it. We don't have to go any further. There's nowhere else to look. Remember what I was pointing out, that at certain levels, physiologically speaking, when cells separate, the only one that can grow in certain respects, in certain instances, is the one that has a nucleus. In this kind of sense, the orthodox generally lacks a nucleus. Now, it may hold on another 100 years, 1,000 years, or over the weekend. But it is no longer going to grow. It is defending the old country. It's done for. Now, it may live, it may survive, but when I say it's done for, if you're in the midst of it, and not even being anybody extraordinary, if you're in the midst of it, you can't get past the level of what that institution was already. In other words, it will not be part of the avant-garde. It will not be fresh branches in the tree of life. It'll still serving some kind of purpose, or it'll finally just disappear. It will go off with dinosaurs. And then dinosaurs can be orthodox whatevers. It has, the way it appears in the 3D world, it becomes progressive. It tries to be more inclusive of new ideas, new energies. That is the part that in that kind of example has a nucleus. Another reference to one of the Chi roots, they ask for further elaboration. This is worse than wrong. This is useless. Could you comment more? I'm going to do it a third time. Could I comment more? Here's my comment. Could I have a kickoff maybe in 6/8? The fact that people can't help what they do could certainly serve to debilitate you. But once it is known and you keep struggling on, it's no longer exactly true. Person, still quoting Chi roots, anything can be made to do. All right. If you're not a fanatic in primary matters, then when it reaches the secondary level, almost anything will suffice. And of course, there's no need for anybody to have to be fanatical in the primary matters, such as it's not fanatical to own enough to eat to live. But if you're not fanatical on what would appear to be the primary level, you do not, no offense to this hobby, but you will never become fanatical in the area of gourmetting. In other words, it doesn't matter much what you eat. You don't really care. Now, you may have the hobby, which is fine, but insofar as one possible response to an additional comment on that, it's almost anything will be made to do if you are not fanatical. Yeah. Now, back in the city, the world, there's nothing wrong with being fanatical. I don't mean in necessarily some publicly dangerous manner, but just fanatical. Like, I'm hungry. Well, let's stop here and eat. No. I made you this for supper. I will not eat it. Well, that's all I got, and I got to leave. I got to go somewhere. Well, I'm not going to eat that. Well, if you're hungry, you'll eat it. It's not going to kill you. I know, but I hate turnips. Well, I'll fix you something when I get back. I want something now. You're just not hungry. Not at the primary, well, you may be hungry, but you are now becoming fanatical at the secondary level. There's nothing wrong with not eating turnips as far as I know. There's nothing wrong in having whatever you want to eat. Bless your heart. But as far as being able to make anything do, it is simply a matter of not being fanatical at the primary level. That your hobbies, your apparent interest that life has force-fed you, that's another thing altogether. I guess I'll go ahead and do it. I've told you before I've got, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of cow roots that I never whipped on you for various reasons. And here's one of them. Whip it on you in person. In the city, no, let's see. All right. Some of these look better in writing, I guess, but see if you can follow it, because I don't have to repeat it, it'll ruin it. To explain art, I read one time, sometimes is to defame it. Out near a revolutionary campsite, one guy said, it's wonderful not to want anything. And at that same moment back in the city, in regards to the same subject, another guy was saying, in reference there too, God, it's a tragedy. It's terrible not to own anything, said the other guy. All right, the last one here. Quoting the cry root again, one of them says, there was once a young boy who made friends with an overcoat. Again? All right, again, I think this one is actually too self-evident to comment on. We're going to consider that's the end of the public tape. I got a little something afterwards. Back home. In regards to me saying that you had to finally pull out something useful out of this, I keep feeding in information. I keep feeding in energy. We don't know where. Into this. I can't show you this, can I? Unless I'm going to pull out psychology or religion. But I keep pouring energy, apparently information, ideas, sketches. I'm pouring it into this thing. But you got to take something out of it. It's not just going directly from me to you, it's going into this. Because this thing is this thing. This thing is you. And you got to take something out, and it has got to be real life. And so saying that, it's just, again, the last few weeks or months or days or hours, I've had occasion, some of you ask me certain questions about this and that. And since I was bringing up real life and being useful, there's two or three immediate things in some of the examples that's pulled up. Several people have asked me lately, for instance, here's a good place to start, is there any trick that I knew to handling failing eyesight? If people thought they were needing glasses, or even people that's been wearing glasses have asked me before, is there any way to get over it? Is there any trick? Now, besides all the things I've heard about in the city, I know that there's supposed to be exercises and blah, blah, blah. What you people are wanting magic. And so, some time back, I told several people, well, the magic is this. Take off your glasses, whether you've had them just today that they prescribed them, you got them, or you had them anyway, if you're that serious, throw them away. Now, I've had some people that could do that, and I've had some people that could not. As always, there is no absolute rule. And I told the ones, and even at the time I was a little more elaborate after I just told you that way, those of you that never heard me do that to make the effect. But I told people, all right, go throw them away. Just forget about it. But if things don't get better, don't go blind. Don't throw them away literally, go throw them in a drawer. Unless you know what you're doing, then throw them in the Grand Canyon. But at any rate, there is no absolute unconditional of doing this or that. Some people can do certain things and some cannot. When it gets down to the level of how to make somebody or how to encourage or how to help somebody, for instance, that could not apparently throw away their glasses, if there were ways I could push you individually, this is three-dimensionally, as well as can be put, it would be more trouble than it would be worth. I don't mean to me, and I don't mean just to you, but everything concerned. And I'm not even saying it could be done. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, because you're mistaken to any time say, well, something's impossible. But if you threw away your glasses, took them off, and you could not, your eyesight didn't improve, and you just said it didn't, just none at all, I just can't do it like that. If there were something, and I'm not saying there's not, if there were some way that I could start trying to get you to operate in a certain way, specifically having to do your eyesight, it literally, at that level, would be more trouble, more expense, more effort than it would be worth. I'm not saying to me that, I'm not saying you'd be wasting my time, it would be to you. You would abandon it if I said, all right, I know what we can do, start doing this. I assure you, at that level, very shortly, you'd come back with your glasses on. Or you'd have to tell me, look, I got to wear my glasses. And I understand that. Moving your nervous system, putting that kind of shock that I've talked about, that once you can do it, that you should be doing some version of at least every 7 or 8 years, you can affect things like that. And I'm telling you that for a fact. A fact. I'm telling you something that I know for a fact. Now, as to whether you can do it in your lifetime, I'm not sitting here because I'm not the Pope. I'm not a religious teacher of some kind, so that I'm telling you that, yes, do this, follow these rules, do this, carry my picture, and such will happen. But I've never told you anything, as a matter of fact, that I didn't know for a fact, not a three-dimensional fact, but I know it for a fact. You can be, with terrible eyesight, let's say, enough that you cannot see, that you can't read, which is the most common one I've had some of you ask me about. And you can do something about it. And it's not much more than go through a kind of process. It's almost a form, and I don't have time to go into this a lot, but it's almost a four-dimensional, five-dimensional form of Medivesco. Is maybe go and have yourself examined and let them put on fake glasses, those little temporary things, and you realize, damn, I can see, I can read. And they say, well, what frames do you want? And there's a guy there, you pick them out, and try not to give them any down payment, but they say, all right, pick them up Thursday. You say, I'll be here. Don't ever go back if you know how to do it. Or if you got to go, push Medivesco a little further, go back and pay the son of a bitch. Get your glasses, wear them a day or so, or a couple of hours, until the point you think, I'd rather die than wear these, and then throw them away. Not in a drawer, throw them away. If you knew how to do it, I'm telling you for a fact, that sort of thing can be done. Now, a little more specifically, I guess it's time to get dirty with some of you. I'll make it as a question. Anybody concerned about their sight, whether you're wearing glasses now or whether your eyes are beginning to go bad, any of you, hate to do it to you folks, any of you who still smoke, do you know, I'll be genteel, that there is every likelihood in the world that if you quit smoking that your eyesight will improve? That some of you might be able to throw away your glasses. I don't know how many of you left here are smoking. But you understand, I'm not going to make a blanket promise, but I'm going to give you a serious suggestion that it's not unlikely at all for you to have more oxygen getting to your eyes, that you could do away with glasses, or at least your eyesight would improve. Or any of you that think now that you're getting, whatever they call it, nearsighted with reading and etc., that might be all you have to do. Of course, I bet some of you will go, I knew that. It's just, see, this is an epilogue. This is an envoy. This is not the tape itself. A few other things right quick. I'm not even going to explain some of these, but they just take them for what they're worth. As far as usefulness, do all of you by now understand, if you haven't, and I'm not suggesting anything, I just want, it's things that you either should know or consider them, of how the type and the quantity of food you eat affects your personal tempo of time. How it affects, as part of people fooling around with their diet all these years and fasting under other circumstances, under other guises, of how it can affect the inner noise of your limbic and cortical systems, of affecting what you eat. Remember, you're not what you eat. They got it backwards. But all of you should know that that has an effect In the city, it doesn't matter. That's why it's common knowledge. That's why life will let people do it, because it doesn't change anything. But you should learn from it already. You can change your eyesight, and now we're not talking, let's say we're maybe talking metaphorically, by the type and the quantity of what you eat. And I'm not giving some blanket statement that everybody should be eating the same thing or the same quantity. You may not necessarily should be eating the same type or the same quantity every day. All of you should know, or most of you, and don't anybody do it if it's going to affect your health, but most of you should have been through some of your own experiences of going several days without eating, or eating every other day for a while, or changing the amounts you eat, and to be just aware. Don't look for anything spooky. There is nothing spooky. That will affect the internal blabber. It will affect you talking to you. It will take the dialogue that life has already instilled, and it changes it. But you normally don't notice it. You normally act as some kind of critic. I ate too much. I couldn't sleep good last night. You're missing useful information. There is another little subject. Some of you are going to have to face up to the fact, well, all of you got to face up to it that have the problem, if you ever begin to see it or you find it to be disquieting, that oftentimes the only cure, the only treatment for whining is silence. Unconditional silence. And lastly for this, I want to point out very specifically, and this is a fact, this is not theoretical and it's not theological. It is not your individual obligation to deal with disagreeable people or disagreeable ideas. That's the general impersonal obligation that ordinary people have. It is not yours, and there's no exception, whether it be family, friends. It is not your individual obligation anymore. This is useful information. This is not speculative. It's not something to just think about if you're ever going to extract anything from this. It is not your obligation to look at wrecks. It's not your obligation to look and to wipe your hands through the blood. And I don't care if it's your mother. And of course, now I'm speaking metaphorically. If it's somebody you know, it is not your individual. Life doesn't need it. Life needs it on a general scale. But individually, you're not obligated to put up with disagreeable people, with disagreeable ideas, not just apparently being offered to you outside for you to think about them. And people don't analyze it until they begin to get away from their old territories, if they ever do. But you accept it as being a kind of obligation. Well, every time I hear about children starving, I stop and cry for a while, and I have to pull myself together. That is not your obligation. The general things, not just disagreeable, but the general activities of life, such as having children, such as trying to be famous, such as trying to do good in life, trying to be successful. And there's nothing wrong with any of those. But those kind of general, secondary, and even primary, such as having children, as long as they don't become a secondary hobby. But the general obligations that people have in life, not just dealing with disagreeable people and ideas, but the general things, it's still not necessary that that's your individual obligation. Just because your genetic code says, well, I'm almost 50, if I'm going to get pregnant, maybe I better do it now. Maybe, maybe not. It's not your obligation individually. Or wait a minute, I'm almost 40. Should I start contemplating suicide? Am I as depressed as I think I am? Because I got to face it, there's hardly no chance in the world that I'm going to become a famous rock musician here at the age of 41, looking like I look now. Where are the razor blades, Martha? So, it's not your obligation. It's the obligation of people in general. But it is not your individual obligation. Not once you've got any information about this, not once you can feel any reality. It is not your individual obligation. And if you don't realize that, you're not extracting. You're not taking anything out of this because it is not turned into real life for you. The tape's out. School's out.